In 1942, a man walked into one of the most respected machine factories in America and handed the owners a letter. Inside that letter was a single order from the United States government. And the moment they read it, an 88-year-old company, a company that had built more than 11,000 steam engines, that helped dig the Panama Canal, that was once called the first in the entire world to do something no one else could, was finished. Not bankrupt, not bought out, ordered to stop. And here's the part that makes no sense. The company obeyed, and the thing they were forced to abandon turned out to be the thing they were best at. So why did they never come back? To understand how a giant disappears in the span of a few weeks, you have to go back almost 100 years, to a kid so poor, his neighbors had to lend him his own tools. Picture rural Indiana, 1837. A baby named Edward Huber is born on a farm so ordinary that history almost forgot it existed. No money, no connections, no safety net. But Edward had one thing, and it's the same thing every single person in this story will eventually underestimate. He couldn't stop inventing. As a teenager, he apprenticed to a blacksmith. Then he became a machinist, then a wagon maker. And somewhere in all that grease and fire, a question started eating at him. The same question that haunts every great inventor. Why is everybody still doing this the hard way? For Edward, this was raking hay. Farmers were doing it by hand, breaking their backs across endless fields. So Edward built a machine to do it for them, a revolving hay rake, and in 1863 he patented it. Now here's where most people would tell you he got rich. He didn't. He was so broke that when he moved to Marion, Ohio at 27 years old to sell this rake, the neighbors literally remembered him as the poor young man who had to borrow tools because he couldn't afford his own. Sit with that for a second. The founder of what would become an industrial empire started out unable to afford a wrench. 1860s style, in 1865, things turned. He married a woman named Elizabeth Hammerla, and her brothers came to Marion too, and they had something Edward didn't, a planing mill, a place to actually build. And that's the first domino. Because the moment Edward Huber had a workshop, he didn't just build hay rakes. He built something that breathed fire. But before we get to the machines that made him famous, there's a partnership Edward formed on the side that almost nobody talks about. And that partnership, it would end up helping build one of the greatest engineering wonders in human history. Hold that thought, because first, you need to see how big this got. By 1874, the hay rake company had a new name, the Huber Manufacturing Company. And Edward had moved on to a much bigger obsession, steam. These weren't tractors like you're imagining. These were steam traction engines, roaring, smoke-belching iron monsters with wheels 8 feet tall, the kind of machine that made the ground shake when it rolled past your farm. And Huber didn't just build them, he perfected them. He invented the first return flue boiler steam traction engine. He built threshing machines that separated grain faster than anything farmers had ever seen. And the numbers got insane. Over the years, Huber Manufacturing built 11,568 steam traction engines. By the early 1900s, they were known as one of the largest makers of threshing machines and steam engines in the entire United States. The broke kid who borrowed tools, he now ran one of the most important machine companies in America. But here's the twist most people never hear. Edward Huber wasn't satisfied building farm machines. In 1884, he teamed up with 2 other men, Henry Barnhart and George W. King, to start a second company, a company that built steam shovels. And those steam shovels, between 1902 and 1911, they sent 112 of them to dig one of the most dangerous, most ambitious construction projects in human history, the Panama Canal. That's right, the poor kid from Indiana didn't just feed America's farms. His machines helped carve a path between 2 oceans. And just so you understand the kind of man we're talking about, Edward Huber also ran a foundry and served as the president of a national bank and collected more than 100 patents in his lifetime. 100 patents, from a guy who couldn't afford a hammer. People in town had a nickname for him. They said Edward Huber was a man who loved chasing rainbows. And in 1894, Edward started chasing the biggest rainbow of his entire life. A machine that, if it worked, would change farming forever. It didn't work. In fact, it failed so badly that the company walked away from it for 13 years. So what was it And why does it matter that they were first? That's where this story gets wild. In the 1890s, the world ran on steam and horses, but a few inventors had started whispering about something new: engines that burned gasoline, internal combustion, the same basic idea that would eventually power every car on Earth, and Edward Huber wanted in. In 1898, Huber bought the rights to a gasoline engine, bolted it onto the gearing from his steam machines, and built a gas-powered tractor. Then he did something genuinely bold. He didn't build one, he built 30 of them and tried to sell them. Now, why does 30 matter? Because that one decision earns Huber a place in history books that most people have never opened. Huber is credited as being the first company to put gasoline tractor production on a commercial basis, the first to actually mass produce a tractor and try to sell it to the public. Think about that. Before John Deere dominated, before Farmall, before any of the names you know today, there was Huber. There was just one problem. The technology wasn't ready. These first machines used something called hot tube ignition, and it was wildly unreliable. Magnetos hadn't been perfected. Spark plugs were barely a thing. Carburetors were primitive. The tractors barely ran. The experiment was, in Huber's own words, a disappointment. The results were so bad, they abandoned the entire project. And here's the gut punch. They were right. They were too early. The world wasn't ready for the gas tractor yet. So Huber walked away for 13 years. But in the middle of that gap, tragedy. In 1904, at 67 years old, Edward Huber died, the man who chased rainbows, the poor kid who couldn't afford tools and ended up with a bank, a foundry, 100 patents, and a hand in the Panama Canal, gone. And he died before he ever got to see his impossible idea actually work. But the company didn't die with him. And in 1911, when batteries had improved, when the magneto had been invented, when the technology finally caught up, Huber Manufacturing did something risky. They went back to the rainbow that killed them the first time. They started building tractors again, and what happened next is the most frustrating, fascinating underdog run in the entire history of American farm equipment. Why frustrating? Because they were good, and it still wasn't enough. March 1911. Huber returns to the tractor game with a machine called the farmer's tractor, a two-cylinder beast. And over the next 3 decades, they go all in. They built nearly 20 different tractor models, giants with drive wheels 8 feet tall and fuel tanks holding 65 gallons, then sleeker, smarter machines, the Super 4, the Light 4, a nimble little model they called the Modern Farmer. And these weren't junk. Huber tractors were genuinely innovative. Early leaders in design, known for clever engineering, collectors today travel hundreds of miles to see them. At one anniversary show in Marion, Ohio, 92 vintage Hubers showed up in a single weekend. People love these machines. So Huber should have become a household name, right? Should be sitting next to John Deere and International Harvester in every barn in America. Here's the brutal truth. In its entire history, every model, every year, every factory, Huber built about 14,000 tractors total. John Deere and Farmall, they each built more than that in a single year. Huber was the company that was first to the idea and never first to the market. They made beautiful, clever, reliable machines. And they got outscaled, outspent, and outsold by giants who showed up later but showed up bigger. There's a phrase one historian used that I can't stop thinking about. They said Huber never managed to run with the big dogs of the tractor business. And honestly, that might have been okay. Because while Huber was struggling to compete in tractors, they had quietly built something else. A sideline that almost nobody was paying attention to. A machine for building and maintaining roads. Remember that, the road machine. Because it's about to become the most important detail in this entire story. By the late 1930s, Huber was hanging in there. Not dominating, but surviving. 80-some years of history, a proud name, a loyal following, and then the world caught fire. December 1941, Pearl Harbor, America goes to war, and almost overnight, every factory in the country becomes a weapon in the fight. For most companies, the war meant more work, building tanks, planes, ammunition. For Huber, the war meant a letter. And that letter is the reason you've probably never heard their name. In 1942, the United States War Department made a decision about Huber Manufacturing. Not a suggestion, not an offer, a decree. Stop making farm equipment. The country was at war, and the government needed roads. Roads for trucks, roads for tanks, airfields, bases, supply lines stretching across the world. And Huber happened to be very, very good at building the machines that build roads. So the War Department ordered Huber to drop tractors entirely and pour everything into road construction equipment for the war effort. And just like that, the tractor line that Edward Huber had chased for nearly 50 years, the line his company had bled for, the machines collectors would one day cross the country to see, was switched off. Now, here's the thing about war orders. You don't argue, you comply. So Huber complied. The tractors stopped rolling off the line. The molds went cold. The farm equipment division, after almost 90 years, just ended. But surely, when the war ended, they came back, right? Peace returns, the factories reopen, the tractors roll again. They never did. The war ended, the restrictions lifted, and Huber Manufacturing made a choice that sealed their fate. They looked at the tractor business, the giants they could never outproduce, the market they could never quite crack, and they decided it wasn't worth going back to. So they didn't. 88 years after a poor kid in Indiana patented a hay rake, after 11,000 steam engines, after helping dig the Panama Canal, after being first in the world to commercialize the gas tractor, the Huber tractor simply stopped existing. No dramatic bankruptcy, no scandal, no fire, just a government letter, a war, and a quiet decision never to return. That's how a giant vanishes. Not with an explosion, with a memo. And that should be the end of the story. The company faded, the name was forgotten, and that's that. Except it's not the end. Because remember that road machine? The little sideline nobody cared about? The thing the War Department forced them to focus on? That machine was about to do something incredible. It was about to outlive the entire company that built it. And the twist of how it happened is my favorite part of this whole story. When Huber was forced to abandon tractors, they leaned into a machine that had started life as something called the Model B grader. After the tractors died, they renamed it. They called it the Maintainer, and the Maintainer was a beast of versatility. With different attachments, this one machine could become a motor grader, a loader, a bulldozer, a road sweeper, a snowplow, even a roadside mower. It was the Swiss Army knife of road equipment. And towns, counties, and crews across the country loved it. Here's the irony so sharp it could cut glass. The thing the War Department forced Huber to make instead of tractors became the most successful, longest-lasting product in the company's entire history. The machine they were pushed into outperformed the machine they chose. But the company itself, it kept changing hands. Huber got absorbed into a larger corporation. Decades passed. And then, in 1984, the parent company shut the manufacturing doors for good. That's it. That's the death of Huber Manufacturing. Roughly 130 years after it began. Except, even that wasn't the end. Because a former Huber employee, a man named Don Braden, couldn't let it die. He bought the rights to all of Huber's engineering drawings. And in a small Ohio town, he kept building the Maintainer himself. The company was gone. The founder had been dead for 80 years. The tractors were museum pieces. And still, the machine refused to die. The rights passed hands again. The design was relocated, revived, paused, and then in 2021, in the 21st century, a new version of the Huber Maintainer went back into production. A design with roots reaching back to a company a government order tried to redirect in 1942 is still being built today. The tractor company vanished overnight, but the machine it was forced to make instead, it's nearly immortal. So let's go back to the beginning, to the broke kid in Indiana who borrowed his neighbor's tools. Edward Huber spent his whole life chasing rainbows. He was first to the gas tractor, and the world wasn't ready. He built an empire of steam, and steam became obsolete. He created beautiful tractors and got out-muscled by bigger names. And in the end, the company he built was redirected by a war, faded by a market, and quietly closed. By almost every measure you'd use to judge a business, Huber lost. And yet, his machines helped dig the Panama Canal. He's in the history books as a pioneer of the gas tractor, the man who tried it before anyone thought it could work. 90+ of his tractors still gather in one Ohio field for people who love them. There's an entire museum dedicated to keeping his name alive. And the road machine his company was forced to build is still rolling off a production line today. Here's the lesson buried in all that rust and steam. Being first doesn't mean being biggest. Being forgotten doesn't mean being unimportant. Sometimes the thing you're pushed into, the thing you didn't even choose, outlasts everything you fought for. Huber manufacturing didn't really vanish, it just got remembered for the wrong machine. A poor kid borrowed some tools and built something that's still running 170 years later. I'd call that chasing rainbows pretty well. If you'd told me a forgotten Ohio tractor company would have a story this wild, I wouldn't have believed you either. And honestly, there are dozens more like it. Empires that rose, vanished, and left one strange survivor behind. If you want to see the next one, you know what to do. I've got a whole list of these lost giants, and the next company on it disappeared in a way that's even harder to believe than this one.